What's up everybody, blessed be. My name is Manon and you're watching Witch in the Working, where we will be discussing all things witchy in and around, throughout and about, above, below, and beyond. The Winter Solstice, also called Yule by many. This is a time of the year that has been celebrated by the masses around the world for centuries and is one of the most diverse holidays celebrated that we still enjoy today. From Santa Claus to the birth of Jesus and everything in between. This cultural favorite is also one of the most misunderstood celebrations that exists in the world today. In North America today, the entire system of Christmas as we all know it is pretty much comprised of a series of pagan practices that have been taken and revised to fit a completely different narrative than originally intended. Let's talk about these and other circumstances that make up the thrilling and underlying theme of Yule. Let's get into it and roll the intro. Welcome back everybody. So just so you all know, this will be my last video for the next week or two until the first week in January, as I'll be going out of town to New Hampshire and won't be carrying my gear with me. So happy Yule to everyone, and I wish all of you the bestest Yule ever. So for many of us pagans, this time around Christmas can be a very confusing time, as there are so many themes and practices that are being thrown about in a constant flurry of seasonal conundrum, and so much of it is quite familiar to us pagans as practices that were originally pagan based throughout the centuries. Now these practices and rituals, though many don't realize they're actually doing ritual, are mostly wrapped up in the packaging of Christianity and Christmas. Again, we see many of these practices and know them as something from a much older time and more connected to the earth, seasons, and cycles of life in nature. The Winter Solstice is the first day of winter and takes place sometime around December 21st to 22nd. During this time, as Wiccans and many other pagan beliefs, the god who crossed into the Summerlands at Samhain is now reborn from the mother goddess. This is the longest night of the year, and beginning the very next day, slowly but surely the sun will begin to wax in strength until midsummer, Yule's counterpart, where the longest day of the year will preside, therefore continuing the eternal cycle of the season. So it makes sense that our sun god, the horned god, is a newborn baby at this time, because if he is being represented as the sun lord, seeing that at this time is the sun at its weakest point in the solar cycle in the northern hemisphere anyways, then the sun should be at its weakest point in power, same as a newborn child is at their most vulnerable and weakest point at this stage of life also. Today, when we see Christmas lights that decorate trees, houses, buildings, and everything else Christmas throws up on, we are in fact seeing an ancient practice of when our ancestors would light candles in honor of luring back the sun god from his slumber in a form of sympathetic magic, which is a form of magic involving like attracts like. In some customs, to those who know any better, these lights are also an honoring to the goddess for birthing the sun god once again. In the southern hemisphere, for instance, in Australia, the summer solstice is actually happening right now, which again is the complete opposite of the winter solstice. See my video on the summer solstice linked above and also in the description below once you finish watching this video. As I mentioned earlier, Yule is one of the most widely celebrated holidays in most all of the cultures in the northern hemisphere. Some anthropologists can date the winter solstice as being celebrated as far back as 12,000 years, and some say even longer than that. For early man, this celebratory practice was especially important because the sun was everything to their existence: light, warmth, protection, especially safety from the things that go bump in the night. There was a time when man didn't quite understand how the sun worked astrologically, and it was very important for them to honor their sun as to give influence to help him grow and bring back the longer days so that crops could be planted and the cold snows and season of death be eliminated and life be restored to its full grandeur once again as in the spring and summer. Over time, our ancestors began to realize that the sun cycled along with everything else and were much more confident in the sun god coming and going, but they still felt the need and want to continue honoring the sun during its ever so important cycle of waxing and waning throughout the year. Yule's an Old Norse word that literally translates to wheel. This was a time, especially in Roman and Norse traditions, that it was believed that the goddess was in essence turning the wheel once again, back to the beginning, bringing forth the cycles of the season to start from scratch and wash, rinse, repeat all over again. In Norse traditions, there was a celebration that lasted 12 nights. In fact, the common Christmas song we know of today, the 12 Days of Christmas, was most likely derived from the Norse and Celtic customs that were celebrated by these cultures in the not-so-distant past. Even in ancient Egypt, the solstice was celebrated. Not only did the Egyptians celebrate the birth of their sun god Ra, they also celebrated the creation of the universe itself. It was said that in the beginning there was nothing but noon, which was a black sea of chaos, which is often likened to the womb of the goddess. From this sea of chaos, Ra was born, and he created and gave rise to other deities. After he created these deities, he cried dark tears given to him by noon, and in turn created all of men and women of Egypt. It's believed in Egypt that if it rains on the solstice eve, that this in fact is Ra crying and once again bringing new life to Egypt. Wreaths are a common decoration we see all throughout Yule every year. A wreath represents the wheel of the year and also the cycles of everything in life. The use of wreaths as a decoration probably came to us from the Scandinavians, who would create and decorate the wreaths and place them amongst their homes as a representation of new beginnings and the sacred turning of the seasonal wheel to start things over again. These wreaths were always created from natural materials and promoted life and existence throughout the cold winter months. You can very easily make your own wreath for the solstice holidays yourself. The many craft stores in existence today have a variety of decorations and even sell pre-made wreath bases ready to be decorated with whatever your heart desires for your Yule season. These wreaths also commemorate the act of spinning the wheel to bring about new creation, and magically, spinning has always been a term coined when creating or working a spell. For instance, the terms spinning a spell or spinning a charm. In Germany, a goddess named Frau Hoida was believed to ride on a sleigh that would actually glide on the winds in the sky, and she would give gifts in gold to her faithful followers. Does this remind you of anyone else? Interestingly, also in honor of the goddess, people were not allowed to use anything that was of a rotary type nature on this day. Everyone had to ride by sleigh, and no clocks, mills, or anything could be used during this honoring. All use of any wheel was reserved for Frau Hoida, as she was known to be spinning fine cloths to give as gifts to her people. Even to this day, in parts of Germany, a giant wreath or wheel is decorated and set ablaze and rolled down a hill in honor of bringing back the sun. Christmas itself is a holiday that stole the pagan holiday of Yule. Originally, the celebration of the birth of Christ was in August, and the original Christmas was actually celebrated in August. When the church couldn't stamp out the practice of the celebration of the pagan birth of the sun god, they decided that if they couldn't beat the pagans, then simply move the Christian holiday of Christmas from August to the winter solstice date of December, and in turn see if they just couldn't get them to forget the pagan practices and start practicing the Christian version instead. Mithras was one of the most celebrated sun gods in early history, which his reach stretched from Rome into Greece, Persia, Egypt, and Asia. His story was most likely the influence of the common Judeo-Christian concept of Jesus. Mithras was born in a barn from a virgin mother. He was also considered the sun personified and was the child of the god of all gods. His followers also continually pray for his return, which will herald life eternal for all humankind. The tradition of gift-giving during Yule and Christmas most likely came from the Romans during their Saturnalia celebrations, which was in turn what they called Yule. This was a celebration to honor the god Saturn and was considered a New Year's celebration where gifts would be given to honor loved ones who had passed during the previous year. Bells are another pagan-based theme we see adorning the Christmas festivities we see today. The Norse cultures would use them to frighten away the thumps in the night and also to herald the sun on its return the following day of solstice night. Bay and bayberries is yet another custom that was derived from early pagan ancestors. This comes from the Roman Greek god Apollo, as bay was sacred to this god. What did he have to do with Yule? Apollo drove the chariot in which the sun rode, so it was very important to honor him in order to encourage him to steer his chariot back towards Earth to bring the sun back to the masses. Many of our pagan ancestors in quite a few different cultures would also tend a constant flame of one type or another, whether small or large, depending on the culture, all year long, never letting it go out in representation of the Sun Lord. On the solstice eve, the fire would be allowed to die out, but relit the following morning to symbolize the sun god's rebirth. One of the most common images we see during the Christmas holidays, no matter where you go, is of course the Christmas tree. This is the one time of the year when just about everyone we know has a real or fake one set up in their home for the Christmas holidays. Well, yep, as you may have already guessed, this too is stolen from paganism. The ancient Celts say these evergreen trees are a representation of eternal life because they do not die from year to year like the deciduous trees do. Not only was this symbolic of the hope for the sun's return, but also for the goddess, as she never dies just like the trees. Many would bring a tree into their home for the winter solstice to bring forth the life-giving properties of eternal life vibrations around the peoples and animals of the home. The Celts would also decorate these trees with imagery of what they would want to bring into their lives for the waxing year to come. Hence, we get our custom of setting up a Christmas tree and decorating it with ornaments and lights for the season. The Yule log is another pagan-based item that is still incorporated in Christmas celebrations today. This comes to us from the Celts once again and would be cut from an oak tree and brought inside as a sort of phallic symbol to honor the god in his return. The log would be decorated with holly, mistletoe, and evergreen to represent the entwining of the god and goddess and the concept of springing forth new life in the coming year. Candles would be put into this log to represent, in some circumstances, the god and in others, the goddess. Another very common pagan theme during the winter and summer solstice both is the Battle of the Kings. The Battle of the Kings is the concept of two kings, the Oak King and the Holly King, though some traditions use the Wren and the Robin. During the lighter half of the year, which is the time from the winter solstice to the summer solstice, the Oak King reigns supreme. During the darker half of the year, which is from the summer solstice to the winter solstice, the Holly King reigns supreme. Every solstice, these two kings battle it out, and the victorious king reigns supreme for their chosen time of the year. My band Witch's Mark wrote a song about this fabled battle, which I have linked in the description below for anyone who wishes to download it and give it a listen. I'll also include the lyrics below so you can follow along with the song if you want to. The following is a short story that I wrote back in 2017 about this battle. I plan on maybe making a short film about it, but let me know what you think in the comments below after you've heard it. It's spring. Ostara festivities have just wrapped up from just a few days ago as a wild and lustrous weekend-long celebration has once again climaxed, leaving the village residents to recover from a slow and groggy magical hangover. One boy, however, feels much the opposite. Tuamas is a young strapping boy of 18 years of age, just barely a man. For the past few years now, he's felt a strange urge and pull towards adventure and seeking for something that eats at him on a daily basis. He's nothing to go on other than his excessive yearning to travel north through the great forest and beyond towards the mountains that peak in the distance. He can no longer hold back his desires. In the next few days, he gathers his supplies and says his goodbyes to his family and village friends and heads off on his journey. The Holly King dwells in a high castle in the sacred mountains of Azeroth. These mountains are very magical, and they are home to all of the mystical sacred creatures that mankind has ever dreamed of. This morning, he sits wisely upon his throne, stroking his long beard as he gazes into the mirror of Lilith, proudly dwelling upon his rule and protection over the dark of the year, called Dwaelog in his tongue. Though Dwaelog is only halfway through, he already feels the springs coming in, set forth by the goddess herself. He grows older each day, but does not grieve. In fact, he embraces his cycle and fully understands the cyclical nature of his ultimate sacrifice. This day, the Holly King receives a very special visit from the lady herself. They embrace, and the spring meadows and forests begin to flow with life of all shapes and sizes, plants and animals alike. The lady asks the king, "Have you sent for him?" The king bows in respect and answers, "Of course, my lady." He is on his way as we speak, his journey long and hard, but rewarding. The goddess gazes into the mirror of Lilith and sees Tuamas beginning on his journey through the forests, mountains, swamps, and seas, traveling north ever closer towards Azeroth. The goddess embraces the king once again and says, "As is custom, I will head off now to guide and prepare our young king to be." The goddess now goes to Tuamas and appears to him in different forms throughout his journeys and leaves him treasures along his way to help prepare him for his battle to come. In the great forest of Gwynthor, she appears as a mighty grizzly who causes him to stay on course and also leads him to a small cave where he finds a mighty gnomish crafted sword, flawless in nature. within the airy steeps of Frau. She appears as a majestic hawk whom steers him to the north, ever remaining on course, and also leads him to a mighty oak on the edge of the steep, where in a hollow he finds a great chest piece made of fey steel to protect him. Once again, the lady appears to Tuomas as a mighty bison on the plains of Shustar, and in his journey, he is once again led to a grove of trees, in the center of which he finds a strong draconian crafted helm. And lastly, along the Sea of Icthar, he is greeted by the lady as a large orca, whom assists him to a small island where he gathers undyne crafted bracers and leggings. Finally, Tuomas reaches the foot of Azeroth. Here he is greeted once again by the lady, this time as a wise owl, whom leads him to a winding path that leads up to the top of the sacred mountains. At the beginning of this path, he finds Morton crafted boots, his final piece. Now our young king is complete and has but one final destiny. This journey has taken Tuomas 3 months, and now it is Midsummer Day. Upon reaching the castle in the courtyard, a much older, wiser Holly King stands in full armor awaiting battle. Though Tuomas is much stronger than our now seasoned Holly King, the Holly King could easily defeat Tuomas, but he knows the nature of the sacrifice and must relinquish his throne so that the lighter half of the year may shine through. Now the Oak King and Holly King face each other in anticipation of steel hitting steel. The goddess steps forward from the shadows and says, "Begin." Steel meets steel, and the battle clashes ring through the mountains, and the summer thunders roar across the mountains, fields, seas, and plains. Finally, in a fell swoop of honor and sacrifice, the Holly King subsides to the Oak King and relinquishes his throne in sacrifice and honor. The Holly King returns to the Summerlands to rest until his time once again. The Oak King now sits upon the throne this midsummer night to bring forth, guide, protect, and rule the now lighter half of the year called Rakthar. Here he will gain in wisdom and, like the Holly King before him, learn the nature of sacrifice, grow old and wise, and in turn relinquish his throne to the new Holly King. So, that's the end of my short story. What did you guys think? Be brutal, it's okay. Well, that's going to wrap up this episode of Witching and Working. I hope you all enjoyed this episode. Please hit that subscribe button and ring that bell to be reminded of future episodes to come. How do you celebrate Yule? Will you be doing a ritual to celebrate this season? What did you guys think of my Battle of the Kings story? Again, I ultimately want to make a short film out of it, so I don't know. What'd you all think? Let me know in the comments below. I love you guys and gals. Until the new year, blessed be.